a team member who'd been there from early on, built a lot of their tech. It was based actually out of Nigeria. Part of what he used his funds for was to buy his mum a car for Christmas, right? Other people in the team were able to actually put a deposit on a house as a result of it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Startup Equity Matters podcast. I'm Cal and this is Kim. I look after partnerships and community at Cake, and Kim's CEO and co-founder. So we're excited to actually talk about some really interesting topics today. I think I'd love to kick it off with just talking about VCs and VC investing. And I think, you know, there's so much focus on the investing side and there's a lot of talk about VCs and they dominate conversations, but it'd be great to get some perspectives and just some understanding about some of your thought processes around VCs and when to get VCs and maybe when VCs may not be appropriate. I'd love to get your thoughts on, you know, your journey at Cake as you've navigated through funding rounds and that. Like, how have you thought about them as an investor and actually tried to get the right deal terms, but also in terms of the right fit in terms of the investor you're getting as well.
Awesome subject. And VCs is one of the accelerants for startups among many. So it's a big subject and let's dive into it. I think to kick off, when you're becoming a startup founder and entrepreneur, you're on a learning journey. So you have to pick your battles and figure out what to learn. Going into the kind of the VC route, that's a big learning there as well. So make sure you pick what's right for you and we can dive into that. We've been through a few rounds and we have some awesome VCs that are backing Cake and done multiple rounds in both up markets and down markets. So seen it from different perspectives, and the market influences a lot the appetite from VCs and how you're going to approach it. So that's really important to be aware of that as well as we go into a VC round.
I think that's a really interesting point you made around through up markets and down markets. And one thing that I've heard some pretty smart people talk about in terms of actually thinking about the investors you want to be actually coming on the journey with you is actually, it's not only how they're going to support you through the good times, but how they're actually going to support you through the down times, whether they be, you know, your particular business is actually going through a tough time or be an ecosystem going through a tough time. And I actually remember being in Singapore with Jason, sitting down, we were actually having a beer, I think somewhere, and actually getting a phone call from one of our early VC investors after 2021 and talking about, well, this is what's happening in terms of actually the funding environment and everything, and then actually just alerting us and actually talking about, well, what are the options and how can we help you manage through this journey? And that was obviously a great proactive and very supportive framework that they're taking. But yeah, that's definitely something I think is super important for actually people to think about. And yeah, the way to do that is obviously ask the VCs, but also ask other companies that have been in their portfolio as well and do your due diligence on your investor. It's not just about them doing due diligence on you.
Definitely agree with that. And I just want to mention also what you see in the news is the 0.0001% of the top success fundraising stories. So just be aware of that. For most startups, it's a huge extra work to do a fundraise with a VC, receiving a lot of no's and keep pushing through, which you will have to put energy into that you will take away from something else. So don't always trust the news. Even in good times, it's going to be a lot of work for most people to get VC funding, and maybe you don't even get it. So you need to have a backup plan.
Yeah.
Where should we kick off with the VC? I think one of the things is really also the stage you're at. If you take VC money very early on, you kind of go into the VC route, which is basically always looking for the next race, because a VC will expect from you that you are growing very fast and you need a new valuation that can show the progress you're doing as a company. So typically when you take VC money, you could expect to raise within 1 year to 1.5 years typically to get the next valuation. So you're kind of on that route if you take VC money, and just be aware of that as a startup.
Yeah.
If you can delay it somehow, bootstrap as long as possible, that can be really good for a lot of startups, not necessarily everyone. Some startups, some ideas, projects need more funding to take off. Like if there's a lot of hardware or research that needs to be done, SaaS platforms, tech platforms can typically be bootstrap easier, especially with the tools nowadays. But other startups need typically funding unless the founders have access to cash. So it also depends on what you're trying to solve.
And I guess the other element to that is like there are non-dilutive sources of funding out there available. There's grants, depending on, again, the type of business you are, what you're actually doing. As you progress a little bit along your journey, there's opportunity for revenue-based financing or venture debt, and there's a bunch of other instruments that are actually outside of just equity funding that you should actually have on your horizon as you're going through that journey. And then obviously, if you are raising money, wherever you're raising it from, is just being really actually diligent about how you actually deploy those funds.
Yeah, going into that. So it's kind of generally understood if you take money, it's something is going to grow. And I don't agree with that. I think it's really, really important to, as a founder or founders, to sit down and really think about what is this money going to do for you? What is it you're putting money into? What can you do without money? And then if you're going to take some money, 100,000, a million, 5 million, 100 million, how are you going to be very, very certain you're going to accelerate something? Now, if you're sitting on, you found an idea and you prototyped a minimum viable product and you're just seeing a lot of users that are using your product and wanting it, and you simply can't keep the product running because you need to scale up the platform, you need to service the customers. This is a great problem to have.
Yeah.
And there, most likely you would need to hire, you need resources to be able to deal with that product market fit or whatever you're feeling. So that's a more good example where, just we need some money here to grow this thing.
Yeah.
Other times it's, you're taking money to test an idea. That's a bit more dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And even if you are very convincing to get some money to test out an idea, well, if it doesn't become of anything, then, you have a history of that. So it's important to think about how you're going to spend the money. For me, the most important thing is the team that you're going to build. So, spending money really wisely on salaries, which is often a huge cost in a company, especially when we scale with technology, building SaaS, for example. The biggest cost is hiring your team. So, make sure you can grow the revenue that the team is capable of generating. At Cake, we like to measure our annual recurring revenue per full-time employee to make sure we become more and more efficient, more effective at building our startup with money.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that we, many, many years ago, I heard a very successful investor talking about having this mindset of actually porpoising when you're raising capital. And he'd actually run a number of successful startups themselves and exited. And he said, what we actually always thought when we actually raised was, we actually have a plan of how, once we go back underwater, we're starting to burn cash again, we have a plan for how we're going to get back to the surface where we get to profitability, right? With that funding round we've got. And he said, look, how it actually turns out in reality is for us, he said, we always had a new idea where we would invest further funds. So we never actually stayed in profitability. We always got back at or close to that, actually went and raised more money and actually deployed that funding in there. But we always had that path back to profitability. So we didn't have to rely on raise. Now that's a great, and certainly in the last couple of years, that's been very much in vogue. But there are a lot of other business models out there where it's sort of growth. And you look at a lot of the high profile, Airbnbs and Ubers and those sort of things. What's your mindset around, do you think that has a place where it's actually not just about that porpoising effect?
Yeah, I think there can be many examples of businesses that are almost profitable from day one.
Yeah.
But most importantly, it comes back to building a startup. It's making sure you've found a problem that is big enough that someone is willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
And there's enough people there, big problem, big market, deep pockets.
Yeah.
Litmus test that, because if you're lying to yourself and you can get money, you're not going to be in a good position. It's not going to solve itself.
Yeah.
It's up to the founders and the team to really, really make sure the problem is big enough and worth pouring resources into, your time and money as well. The other thing I want to say is, right now, we are seeing that it's a pretty tough time for a lot of VCs. There's a lot of hyper growth in the AI space. So there's definitely a lot of amazing things happening there. But there's also a lot of startup companies that are that are struggling with getting to higher valuations, getting the next raise done, which affects the VCs. So a lot of the message that I'm seeing out there is that VCs actually want startups to have a path to profitability, to prioritize that. And we've seen, really growth times where there was a lot of money available around 21, etc. And then it's changed into where we are now. And this is the first time I'm really seeing that they're all really making sure that the startups have a long runway and a path to profitability. So there's a shift happening now, and the market does influence a lot, if you should grow and how much you can grow. It's always going to be, I think, a trade-off between profitability and growth. And, I think it's a great model to, if you are capable of always seeing the path to profitability, but you can spend a bit on growth, and you never hit a floor where you become into a difficult situation where you have to raise to survive, right? And as a startup, you basically in a space where you have to grow every single day. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind. You can't just pause things. So when you're going towards profitability, well, you can't kill the growth. Then you're not a startup. And no investor will back you. So you need to make sure you show growth even going towards profitability.
You mentioned about you think one of the big drivers of success or failure is the actual quality of the team and getting the right people around you. So how do you think about that with Cake? And then, what have been your experiences in terms of actually, building teams? What are the critical elements to actually getting the right team around you and driving your success?
Yeah, it's a huge subject. Just one thought is definitely, I do consider myself a humble person, but if I look back, I definitely had a lot of arrogance in just thinking, I would get the right team from day one. And I just think it's a nonstop iteration and learning process to get that right team. Like,
it's as much art as science, isn't it? Right? It's not.
I have my own biases.
I
came from engineering background, so a lot of things were measured through that filter. People looking for people that I found similar to myself, even without knowing it, and areas that I dislike. You don't need marketing. You don't. So it's a huge learning journey, and I think how fast you can build that experience of understanding the different areas that are necessary to come together to build a great brand, to build a great product, to service the customers. It's a lot of different areas to make sure you have a financial engine behind, and you kind of gotta know enough about each of these areas to build the right team for that. So I don't think there's one perfect model. It's really understanding yourself and becoming a leader, and a leader is someone who takes responsibility of building the best team and constantly supporting them and dealing with all the problems that comes with a team.
One of the things, one of the terms that you use, which I love, I think it's great, is you talk about unleashing mini founders. I think that's a great term, because I think I've worked in large corporates, I've worked in startups as well, and I know that particularly in a startup where people talk about it's a marathon and it's a roller coaster. I think it's a marathon roller coaster ride, right? It's a bit of both, right? And in that environment, you need people with the right skills and all those sort of things. But for them to actually stick in and really actually right through that journey and continue to add value through it, you need them to be aligned in terms of your mission and your purpose, and you also need them really genuinely have that ownership mindset. I know a big thing for us is the whole equity rewards as part of it. So not only are they thinking from a mindset perspective, but they are genuine owners. They have a stake in the company or whatever. Can you talk to me about what's that journey been for you in terms of putting that together at Cake, and how do you think about that for other companies?
Yeah, absolutely. My own mind shift that had to happen was to not think that people are a role in the company. Like, functionally, yes, we need to support the different roles that are necessary, but each person is much more than that. In a startup, it's absolutely critical that they're aligned to the mission, else it's not going to work. They have to work cross-collaborative. They have to do more than what's necessary in showing up every day from a certain hour and leaving at a certain hour. This is very, very different in a startup. So it's an ownership mindset. It's a mindset of feeling meaning in what you do as part of a team, and you have to have a really strong collaboration mentality. So I think a mini founder is a good way to express that, because that's really someone that can go into different areas and don't just see themselves as executing a task with a specific role attached to it. It's someone that cares about the whole business, that cares about the ownership, making it valuable for themselves and for the whole team. And also, I would love to see everyone just going and building their own things one day. They don't have to be founders or anything, everybody is on their own journey.
Yeah.
But the more they get at least the opportunity to think like that, the more things they can do or inspire others and shape the world. So I love that.
Awesome. And I think that's right. It's like, you've got the driving the success of a particular startup at a particular point in time. I had the opportunity yesterday to actually talk to one of our cake clients who's actually recently been through a Series A round. Through that round, they actually had the opportunity to actually provide secondaries for some of their team members as well. And it was extraordinary hearing the stories about what they talked about in terms of, they had a team member who'd been there from early on, built a lot of their tech. It was based actually out of Nigeria and was able to, part of what he used his funds for was to buy his mum a car for Christmas, right? Other people in the team were able to actually put a deposit on a house as a result of it. And just hearing Sky talk about actually what that meant for the team and then how that's actually also fueling the ongoing enthusiasm because they've just raised a chunk of money for the next phase of their growth was absolutely awesome. And then also what it meant for her as a founder. So I think that's really interesting. And
so I think, how much you give, how you give ownership to your team as you're developing the startup is extremely important and very, very difficult and definitely one of the biggest reasons why Cake exists. You want to reward the early team members, especially the ones that are there for the very long run, but you're also going to have team members that come in and leave, and in the early days, the first year or two, and you're trying to get product market fit and the first million annual recurring revenue, if you're like a SaaS business, is so critical. It's do or die.
Yeah.
So the people that do a part of that, they should naturally be rewarded well. But you're also going to then potentially, they might leave. Then you're going to hang with some people that are in the cap table that you've given away ownership. And then you're growing the team and these people are working just as hard, maybe with a less risky startup, but just as hard, and you want to reward them well as well. So this is really, really tricky. I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think it's really good to follow some of the best practices and the data that we have on the platform. I think very carefully, even if it's like in Cake's story, and I think that's normal for a lot of startups, in the early days, you don't really think necessarily that the equity will be worth a lot.
Yes.
Like you don't really fully believe it. That
you're right.
You're finding hard to survive and build something.
Yeah.
And so, but that can influence your decisions. So make sure you're really always just, visualizing this will be worth 10 million, 100 million, 1 billion. What does it look like? What should the people end up owning for the impact that it have had on that journey? And make sure there's always room for the next people on the journey and the ones that stick it out the long time. So definitely use the data that we have on Cake and all the advice, and we're constantly improving on that as we learn from a lot of startups out there.
I think one of the things, just to follow up on that, is like, there's so much focus on funding data and average round sizes and all this. How much do I dilute each round? But one of the things a lot of people actually miss is that actually the percentage of ownership you're allocating to your teams over time generally becomes the biggest stakeholder in the business. I think the average pool, ESOP pool, by the time you get into that, $1 to $10 million band is like 20%, right? So if I've got a $5 billion valuation, like $1 billion of that, it's been allocated to my team, right? Which is probably more than any single investor, and probably at that stage, probably more than any of the founders as well, right? So do it properly, make sure your team understand it. That's another really important thing I would say is like, I get the opportunity to talk to all sorts of people about this topic, and there is a major difference between the people who understand how these things work, and then particularly in the context of stock option plans in the US, the decisions that they can make around elections, around early exercise and all those sort of things, and the people who don't understand how it works. And, I've spoken to people from, Dollar Shave Club. People have been in, early employees at Riot Games. People are early employees at Stripe and Brex and whatnot. And the people who knew what they were doing and made good decisions, informed decisions early on with their equity had very different outcomes from those people who didn't really know. And, to one guy that I'd spoken to was with, the company is one of the most successful companies of all time. They've listed or whatever. And I remember talking to him about, what did you know about the stock options when you were actually giving them? And he said, well, I was just excited because I got a shirt that said, I'm an owner, right? So he didn't really know how they worked at all, right? So yeah.
And it shouldn't be down to someone having enough knowledge at it from day one to make those good decisions, right? That's really why we need systems that are just supporting you, so the right decisions will be made for you. Until you kind of educate yourself on the journey.
Well, and like, the example that I gave, the individual that actually did get really good outcomes, part of the reason was that he was actually a lawyer, right? So he knew how these things work. It was all over, right? But the average team member, they don't actually know how these things work. And I know that's a big that's a big problem that we're all passionate about working on. But I don't know whether you want to add any more on that.
No, I just want to say that it is kind of like a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
And it's important to be aware of that.
Yeah.
But it still drives the motivation and that builds a better and better business that will in multiple ways reward the employee. So it should not be all about some big financial outcome, I think. And over time also, I believe and hope we can create more smaller liquidity events along the way that typically is better for a lot of people. But it's getting that ownership. It's being able to go in the direction that is meaningful for you as an individual with a startup. I think that is one of the most valuable things. And equity is actually part of that feeling of ownership.